I want to read something before we start from the book of Matthew. And I know we're in the book of Matthew and we're jumping around. Next week, our guest speaker, he's going to be jumping to later in the book of Matthew. But I want to read something that Jesus says. And I just want this to be on our hearts as we think about our passage today. This is in Matthew chapter 13, verses 44 to 46. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold all that he had and bought that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant looking for fine pearls. When he had found one of great value, he went away and sold everything he had and bought it. And like Jesus says, whoever has ears made for listening, use them well for the story that I'm about to tell. Okay. We'll see how this goes. My name is Belshazzar. You probably never heard of me before, but maybe you've heard my story. In fact, you just read it. I'm what you call a magi. I've seen your little Christmas nativity scenes, and I've seen your Christmas cards, and I think that they're cute. I don't mind your Christmas traditions, but all the nostalgia is sometimes keeping you away from the power and the beauty of this story. You see, we magi are not exactly the first people that you would expect God to be reaching out to. We're probably the last people that you would think about when God would invite somebody to his son's birthday party. Why is that? Well, for two reasons. The first, for starters, is that we're not Jewish people. We're Magi's. We're from the East. We're Persians. We're pagans. So we never grew up learning about Abraham or Moses or the law or God's commands or what God wanted from all of us. We didn't know what it meant to be obedient to him. We were just pagans from Persia. And the second thing, this one's a little bit more serious. We were Magi. Do you know what a Magi really is? Here's a snapshot of the life that I once lived. We Magi were renowned around the ancient world as men who could get answers. You see, we were nowadays what you would call a sorcerer, a wizard, a witch. We used many different methods, but they were all for the exact same purpose: to discover the future and to control it. Witchcraft helped us connect to the Dark One. And there is real power here, but it's not a good power. And so what do you think the God of Israel thinks about people like me? Would this God of Israel have ever loved us? Would this God of Israel ever shown us favor? Here's a command from your own holy scriptures, the book of Deuteronomy, straight from your God. When you enter into the land your God is giving you, be very careful not to imitate the detestable customs of the nations living there. For example, never sacrifice your son or daughter as a burnt offering, and do not let your people practice fortune-telling, or use sorcery, or interpret omens, or engage in witchcraft, or cast spells, or function as mediums or psychics, or call forth spirits of the dead. Anyone who does these things is detestable to Yahweh. It is because of the other nations have done these detestable things that the Lord your God will drive them out ahead of you. But you must be blameless before the Lord your God. The nations you are about to displace consult sorcerers and fortune tellers, but the Lord your God forbids you to do such things. Doesn't sound very hopeful for guys like me. What do you think? You see, your God is very strict about these types of things, but he's also a merciful God. He is a jealous God, but he is a loving God. He takes his scriptures very seriously, and it seems like to him that he's against anything that will compete with his authority, will compete with his word. So here, my associates and me at the time were totally surprised that the God of Israel comes and reaches out to us. But then again, your God seems to enjoy rescuing and loving his enemies. And this is how it all happened. There are many of us living in this giant city of Babylon, this ancient, powerful city in the capital of Persia. We served these kings and we looked into our dark knowledge. And I don't think you Christians understand the allure of this secret knowledge, do you? Do you know the power that it is to know things that should be kept secret? And so we did different things. We had many different methods, but I want to share a couple of them. The first thing we did was we would use the livers of dead animals and we would cut them open. I don't know if you guys know about all this, but we would cut open livers, and inside of the livers we would see birthmarks and veins, and we would be able to read the future. And we would meet demons through this. We would also use cards. And I hear that sometimes Christians use tarot cards and they think that it's Christian as long as their God is invoked. And that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. We as pagans used many methods in order to hear from our gods, but one of our most favorite was searching the stars for wisdom. When planets cross, when certain stars align, we could tell things were coming. But this was different. This time, man, I'm telling you, this God of Israel, he's not like our gods. We would take all this effort, we would put all this stuff in, and sometimes we would meet with things that we shouldn't have met. But this God was different. Nothing like this. The light was so bright, it was blinding, and we didn't have to go back and consult charts or look in our archives. We knew something was going on. You see, because of your holy scriptures, we knew that this special star pointing to the west was Israel's sign. Because there's many Jews still living in Babylon, and we were all familiar with their prophecy. This is how it goes. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star will come out of Jacob. A scepter will rise out of Israel. He will crush the foreheads of Moab, the skulls of all the people of Sheth. And we knew in an instant that this star was the symbol of God's coming king. Israel would receive this king without borders. He was here finally after thousands of years. Of all the ages to be born, we were on earth at the same time as this King of Kings. No distance was too far. No price was too high. This was the opportunity of a lifetime. Now, no one takes a 4-month journey on a camel unless it's a very important endeavor. Here there was hundreds of us. There was us sorcerers. There were our servants. There was a small army sent to protect us on this dangerous road. 1,500 kilometers of inhospitable terrain. I mean, before we left, some of the citizens of Babylon told us how crazy we were to even take on this 4-month journey. And so here we were, day after day, night after night, the anticipation growing in our hearts with every passing week. When we left Babylon in the spring, all the crops were just being planted. And I remember pulling into the outskirts of Jerusalem with our camels, and all the first fruits of the fall harvest were being gathered. An entire season had been taken up on our journey from Persia to Jerusalem. Oh, guess what? We're supposed to have been doing slides the whole time. I was so into the story that I was into character. You're supposed to have been looking at these guys, and it just said change slides. Anyways. Oh boy. We'll have to edit that out. Did the people in Jerusalem capital already know? Were there long wait times to see him? Were the people even allowed to see him, or was there an army protecting this king? We all knew how much Israel loved their kings. You see, when the Jews lived in Babylon hundreds of years before, they always talked about this coming king and their desire for David to be on the throne. So imagine our surprise arriving in Jerusalem. A large crowd gathered all around us to see these hundreds of foreigners in our caravan. And there was so much excitement, so many questions. But when we told them about the king and the prophecies and our excitement, there was nothing. I mean, the people seemed too busy to care, too full of activity to even stop and think. They didn't seem to need this king. And to be honest, we Persians were disappointed in God's people. How could there be such a casual attitude toward our news? How come none of the scriptures were even cared about, none of the prophecies? And I became angry. Why didn't God send us Persians, his king? We traveled 1,500 kilometers to be with him. We would have given everything. But these ungrateful people, they didn't even care. Surely God's king deserved better than this. And so here we were for days on end until eventually we were summoned by the great king Herod. Even in Persia we knew about this king Herod. You see, he had joined with the Romans and set up battalions and outposts and armies to protect Rome from the Parthian Persian Empire. We all knew about this king. Not only did he have great achievements, but he even seemed to know everything about this King of the Jews. Finally, someone who cared about his own scripture. Finally, someone who sees things, the true value in all these prophecies. Finally, someone who cared. And we explained to him all about the star and the long journey, and we excitedly told him about all of our hopes of seeing this good king. And Herod was eager. He was ready to help. There was a scribe that he brought into his throne room, and the scribe pulled out an ancient scroll and read from it. Where would this king be born? Where would we find him? But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. And so Herod explained to us the way to this little town of Bethlehem, this little village, this little hamlet. It was only 5 kilometers southwest of the capital, about an hour's walk away. And we asked him if he would accompany us on our short journey. But he said no. He said, no, I'm not able to join you right now because I have serious matters to attend to. But tell me about him. Tell me where he is. Tell me everything about him so that I too can go and honor him. What could be more pressing than this? Meeting this king. We had traveled 1,500 kilometers to be able to see this King of Kings with our very own eyes. And he wouldn't even travel with us for 5 kilometers. But then again, at least he seemed to show some interest, unlike the rest of the citizens of Jerusalem. And as we left the city with its people busy in their markets, running to and fro, we wondered at their very blindness. Here was the God's King of Israel, the King of the Jews, born an hour's walk away, and no one even bothered to look into it. But as we left, our hearts were lifted up. Because as we were leaving the city, there ahead of us on the road, way up in the evening sky, we saw that star again. God's favor was with us. God wanted us to be with him. God wanted us to see his king. And as we entered that little village of Bethlehem, it was so unlike Jerusalem. There was a quietness and a calmness. There wasn't any hustling and bustling. This was just a small farming village. And we walked through the cities, or the village, and all the marketplace was shut down. And inside of the little houses, there was orange glow of the little candles, and it was all quiet. And the star kept going and going until it landed over top of a little house in the outskirts of the village. And so we took our great caravan, which probably was almost the size of this village, and we marched it all the way over to this little house. And I climbed down from my camel, and I looked at the little door and the shabby little situation, and I wondered to myself, what are we doing here? Why did the house stop over this house? Why are we at this home? And I knocked on the door, and eventually someone opened up the door to me. It was this young man, and he had the work clothes of a peasant, and his hands were calloused, and he looked like the salt of the earth. And standing behind him was this young woman, and she was dressed in peasant clothes as well. And I was so confused. But I knew this is where we needed to be. And I explained the star and the prophecy and our trip to Jerusalem and the people's reception and Herod. And I talked about how we had come from 1,500 kilometers away to see this long-awaited king, but how we were so confused why we were here with these two peasant people. What kind of king is this? The man smiled and he asked us to come in. And as many as we could, we crammed into that little house up against the walls, and we were tight there in this little house. And the woman walked out of the main room into a doorway and left. And all the anticipation, all the excitement, all of this was undeniable because we had spent so much time, we invested so much to be here right now in this very moment. And then a minute later, she walked back in, holding the hands of a young boy, maybe a year and a half old. And we all stood looking at him as he walked into the middle of the room, holding her hand, and she said, "This is Jesus, Israel's true king. He has come to save us from our sins." Now, it's hard to explain the things of the heart and what we felt as we looked at this young boy, this little boy, and these two young kids in their peasant clothes raising him. This was the God of Israel's plan. It's not that I doubted the star and the prophecies and Herod. It's not that I doubted it, but I was so confused. Who is this God of Israel? We bowed down before this little boy and we presented our gifts and welcomed his rule on earth. And his humble parents stood by as we looked at him and as he looked at us. And just like that, the night was over. The most important night of my life. And that night as I slept, the God of Israel met me again, and this time through an angel in my dream. And he explained to me how Herod was afraid and threatened by this little boy, even though he was a peasant. He knew that this boy was more than just some boy. And so the angel said, "Go back another way. I'll be with you and I will keep you safe. You have been faithful. Now go back in obedience." And when I woke up, I told the rest of my companions this, and they too had experienced the exact same dream. They had met the angel. And so we planned our route, and we looked for a new way home. And the next 4 months, the 1,500 kilometers back, I had lots of time to think about everything that had happened. Why did Herod want to kill him? Why did this little boy threaten him so much? Couldn't Herod have protected him and supported him as he was coming into his own? Couldn't he have gladly prepared the way? If this was God's plan, why stand in his way? And even worse, why did Jerusalem not even care? I mean, come on, we had traveled 1,500 kilometers to see him, people of Jerusalem. Why couldn't you have traveled 5 kilometers? There's an hour stroll to Bethlehem to see the most important person who has ever lived. It cost us 4 months, and that was only one way. I'm telling you, it was worth every second, but you, Jerusalem, didn't even care. But then again, looking at your scriptures, it seems that the people of God always seem to take their God for granted compared to us foreigners who don't feel entitled to any of his blessings. But maybe that's how it works. When someone feels privileged, they don't believe that they need his mercy. There's no gratefulness in that. But not us magi. We were sorcerers. We spoke with demons. We practiced witchcraft and evil practices. We were the last ones that God should have ever invited into his very story. But meeting that little boy changed it all. Standing there looking at this little boy and these 2 peasant parents, I realized something about this God of Israel. This God chooses the small and the insignificant. This God chooses the broken and the evil and the ugly, the unwanted. This God is a God of grace. This is a God of mercy. And he holds out his hands to all who seek him, no matter who they once were. My name is Belteshazzar, and I used to be a magi until I met your grace-giving God. Okay. So that's the story in a nutshell. Now I want to take some time as a group to kind of just dissect this and look at who our God is. And a lot of this is fiction. I had to create a story behind it. But I want us to just think about this story and think about God and why God chose some sorcerers from a pagan nation to give them his son. So I guess I have a question here. Why did Israel take God for granted?
They were wanting something different. They still had their mind on a political answer to their problem.
Yeah.
Here and now answer.
Yeah, I think so. So it says in our text, if you go in Matthew 2, that the chief priests and the religious leaders are the ones that Herod talked to. So that would be like me, but even people like more than me, like professors and archbishops and popes, and like these are like the head. These are the people who should know better. And they went and talked to those specific people, and those people are like, I don't have an afternoon to do this. Why is it that, if you look in the Old Testament, God's people don't seem to like even care about his grace, where these foreigners are crazy about it. And they're like, your God is such a merciful God. Your God is so amazing. And Israel's like, yeah, I know. But we deserve it, so it just comes with the territory.
I guess they did see themselves as sinners, needing grace.
Right. Mm-hmm. So this story is kind of it's a preemptive, this is still in the intro to the book of Matthew, right? We're going to see exactly what you're talking about, Jerry. Jesus is going to come to people the same way that these wise men come to Jesus, and they're so excited and they want him, and the regular people who should know better don't even care. And the whole book of Matthew, we're going to see this, that there's people who think that they belong to God, so they don't have to listen to Jesus. They don't need Jesus' mercy. They don't need his grace. They don't need his forgiveness, because they're already perfect. And Jesus is like, I haven't come for you. I've come for the lonely. I've come for the broken. I've come for the people who know that they're evil. I'm coming for the people who know they need me. Those are the people I'm coming for. What do you think it would be like if you knew that you were a sorcerer and you actually practiced witchcraft and demonic activity to know that the God of Israel chose you to meet with him? What do you guys think of that? Yeah. Do you think there's people in our world who feel that God would never want to talk with them, that God would never give them a chance, that they are not worth it, and that God would never make a connection to them because of their past, because of who they are as people?
It's got to do with the whole spirit world. Jesus conquered the devil and the spirit.
Right.
So
Mm-hmm.
somehow it's all tied in.
Right.
I guess that the whole story really, Jesus was coming to save the inner man, whereas I think the Jewish leaders, they weren't thinking about that at all. They were thinking about maybe like you were saying, that political situation just as a whole, that they were being oppressed by other nations,
Mm-hmm.
but they just weren't expecting that Jesus was coming to touch each individual life and redeem them.
Mm-hmm. What if God is way more merciful than we understand him to be, but his mercy never lands on people who don't think that they need it? And it just kind of like brushes off like water off a duck's back. And all that mercy that God wants to show our world, wants to show every human being, it just runs right off because they don't think that they need that mercy and they're looking for something different. And the real God, the God with unlimited blessings and this heart that desires to give like a father to a child, many people in our world will never experience that because they don't believe they need that. What do you think of that? The problem isn't with God and how merciful he is, it's with us not being willing to accept that mercy from him.
I don't want to discount our personal responsibility in this, but I was just reminded this weekend too that it's not necessarily about, it is about us and our personal responsibility and our response, but it's like a spiritual battle though.
Yeah.
We're blinded, we're deaf, we have scales, we're numb, we're in pain, and so then we look for something else, and there's a whole lot going on, right? More than just, I don't feel like it today, or, just that I have to be responsible for my actions, but there is something also greater going on.
Right.
Keeping me from seeing the goodness of God. If I allow that, if I
Right.
give that, if I don't repent and change, and I don't mean repent like change my behavior, although that's part of it, but I mean repent like turn towards the Holy Spirit, turn towards God and Jesus, and not, it's a posture too.
So Cheryl, like we can see in the Gospels, Jesus is with different people, and there's different people with pain, and there's distraction and different things. But what is the difference between people who realize what Jesus is and other people who just miss him and he walks right by?
I think they don't want to give something up, honestly.
Yeah?
I think we don't want to give something up,
Yeah.
and then we miss the blessing. Maybe that's just me.
I think Jesus says that's all of us. Okay, so this is just an intro story that Matthew puts in the beginning of his Gospels. That the Gospels aren't CNN accounts. They're not like journalists trying to get every single thing and not forget a story. They put them in there intentionally. So there's other stories that we could have had about Jesus being a little boy that the Gospels didn't choose to put in there. Matthew puts this story in here because he's trying to teach us something and prepare our hearts for when Jesus actually comes on the scene as our King. And so now it's kind of like a chance in the next couple of weeks to prepare our hearts for Jesus, because when Jesus comes, he is the King of mercy. And he speaks right into people's souls. When he meets people on earth, he speaks right into their souls. He goes right past the protective layers and he speaks into their hearts. But there's so many people who just miss it. And they don't like him looking into their soul, so they hide and they walk away. And when we get into the book of Matthew deeper, when Jesus speaks into people's souls, I just encourage you to have that heart that wants to hear him speak into your soul and to call you, like Cheryl's saying, to call you to come to him and come under his kingship, because that's where the mercy is and that's where the blessing is. So I just want to move into a time of communion now. And I'm just going to read out of, where was I going to read of? I'm going to read out of Matthew chapter 13 again.